The phone call came at 3:17 in the morning on a Tuesday that already felt cursed. David Matthews, 38. Widowed for 2 years and 3 months. Fumbled for his buzzing cell phone in the darkness of his cramped bedroom. The caller ID glowed with a number he didn't recognize, area code 907. Alaska. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Hello? His voice came out as a croak. He'd been awake until past midnight again, hunched over bills at the kitchen table, moving numbers around like puzzle pieces that would never fit together properly. Mr. David Matthews. The voice was crisp, professional, cutting through the fog of David's exhaustion. This is Thomas Garrett, attorney with Garrett and Associates in Anchorage. I'm calling regarding the estate of Charles Matthews. David sat up in bed, suddenly alert. I'm sorry. Who? Charles Matthews. Your uncle. I'm afraid I have some difficult news, sir. Mr. Matthews passed away 6 weeks ago in an automobile accident near Denali. I've been trying to reach you regarding your inheritance. David's mind raced. I think you have the wrong number. I don't have an uncle named Charles. My father was William Matthews, and he died when I was 12. He didn't have any siblings. Sir, I have the documentation right here. Charles Matthews, born April 9, 1948, in Akron, Ohio. Brother to William Matthews, born September 22, 1952, also Akron, Ohio. Same parents, Robert and Helen Matthews. The room seemed to tilt slightly. David's father had never mentioned a brother. Not once. His mother, God rest her soul, had never said a word about William having siblings. After his father's death in that factory accident, it had just been David and his mother, scraping by on her waitressing wages until he was old enough to work. Mr. Matthews? Are you there? Mr. Matthews? Mr. Matthews? Are you there? Yeah, I'm. This is just a shock. What kind of inheritance are we talking about? The Glacier Peak Lodge, sir. A luxury hotel property in Alaska, approximately 60 miles northeast of Denali. 62 guest rooms, full commercial facilities, restaurant, conference center. According to the will, you're the sole beneficiary. David's mouth went dry. In the next room, he could hear his 15-year-old daughter Emma shifting in her sleep, probably dreaming of something better than their current situation. The eviction notice was still sitting on the kitchen counter where he'd left it yesterday morning. 30 days to come up with $3,000 in back rent, or they'd be living in his 10-year-old Honda Accord. Mr. Garrett, what's the catch? There's always a catch. A pause. Papers rustling. Well, sir, the property has been vacant for approximately 5 years. Your uncle became something of a recluse after his wife passed. There are some maintenance issues, and the location is quite remote. The nearest town is Whittier, about 2 hours by car when the roads are passable. David rubbed his eyes with his free hand. What about debts, mortgages? What am I inheriting besides the property? The property is owned free and clear, sir. No outstanding mortgages or liens. Your uncle was quite financially comfortable. There are some accounts established for property maintenance and taxes that should cover immediate expenses. After the call ended, David sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the eviction notice he could see through his open bedroom door. A hotel in Alaska. It sounded like something from a fever dream. Too strange to be real. Too good to be true. But maybe strange was exactly what they needed. The next morning, Emma poured the last of their cereal into a chipped blue bowl, rationing it carefully. She was 15 but carried herself like someone much older, with her mother's dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed to see too much. Since Sarah's death, Emma had become David's anchor, the steady voice of reason when his world threatened to spin apart. "Dad, you look like you haven't slept in 3 days." David attempted a smile as he joined her at their small kitchen table. "Thanks for the confidence boost, kiddo." Emma studied his face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read moods and worry lines like weather patterns. "You were on the phone in the middle of the night. I heard you pacing. Tending the live to sane," David told her about the lawyer's call. Watching her expression shift from confusion to disbelief, to something that might have been cautious hope. Emma had inherited her mother's optimism along with her eyes, the ability to find light even in the darkest situations. "So we own a hotel?" Emma asked, setting down her spoon. "Like, actually own it? No mortgage?" "Apparently. In Alaska, in the middle of nowhere. Probably falling apart." Emma was quiet for a moment, and David could practically see the wheels turning behind those thoughtful eyes. "Dad, when's the last time something good happened to us?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When had something good happened? Before Sarah got sick? Certainly. Before the medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover? Before the second mortgage on their house that they'd eventually lost anyway? Before the nights David lay awake calculating whether they could afford both groceries and electricity in the same month? "I know what you're thinking," Emma continued, pushing cereal around in her bowl. "It's completely insane. Alaska? We don't know anything about running a hotel. We've never even stayed in a nice hotel." "But," David prompted, hearing something in her voice. "But insane might be exactly what we need. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? We're already getting evicted. At least in Alaska we'd have a roof over our heads while we figure things out." 3 days later, they were 30,000 feet above Canada, looking down at an endless expanse of mountains and forests that stretched to every horizon. David had maxed out his last credit card to buy their plane tickets, a decision that felt either desperately stupid or desperately inspired. All their possessions fit into 4 suitcases and 2 backpacks, a depressing accounting of what 2 lives could be reduced to. Emma had her face pressed to the small airplane window, watching the landscape below transform from the familiar grid patterns of civilization to something wild and unmarked by human presence. "Dad, look at this. It's like the world before people existed." David leaned over to look. She was right. No roads, no towns, no evidence of human presence, except for the occasional silver thread of a river or the dark slash of a mountain pass. It was beautiful and terrifying in its immensity. At the Anchorage airport, they rented a Jeep Cherokee with 4-wheel drive, the rental agent insisting they'd need it for where they were going. The man, weathered and gray-bearded like he'd spent decades in Alaska, looked at their destination address and whistled low. "Glacier Peak Lodge. Haven't heard that name in years. That place used to be something special, back in the day." "You knew our uncle?" Emma asked. "Charles Matthews." "Sure. Saw him in town maybe twice a year for supplies. Quiet fellow. Kept to himself, especially after his wife died. Heard he closed the lodge after that." The man looked at them curiously. "You folks planning to reopen it?" "We're still figuring that out," David said. The drive north took nearly 7 hours through landscape that seemed designed to humble human ambition. Mountains rose like ancient titans, their peaks disappearing into clouds that looked close enough to touch. Forests of pine and spruce stretched to the horizon, broken only by rivers that caught the afternoon light like liquid silver. Emma was unusually quiet as they climbed higher into the mountains, watching the scenery with an expression David couldn't read. "What are you thinking about?" he asked during one of their fuel stops. "Just, what if this uncle knew we needed help? What if he was watching our family from a distance, waiting for the right moment?" David wanted to tell her that life didn't work that way, that mysterious benefactors and perfect timing belonged in movies, not in the real world. But looking at the impossible landscape surrounding them, he found himself wondering if maybe the world contained more mystery than he'd given it credit for. The GPS led them down a winding dirt road that clearly hadn't been maintained in years. Potholes deep enough to swallow their front wheels forced David to crawl along at 10 miles per hour, wincing every time the undercarriage scraped against rocks. Pine trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the windows. "How much farther?" Emma asked, gripping the door handle as they bounced through another crater. "GPS says 5 more miles. Dad, I think we're driving to the end of the world." The road curved sharply around a massive boulder, and suddenly the trees fell away. Before them stretched a valley so beautiful it didn't look real, like something from a fantasy movie. And in the center, rising from the valley floor like something conjured from dreams, stood the Glacier Peak Lodge. David hit the brakes, and they sat in stunned silence. The hotel was enormous. 6 stories of logs and native stone, built in the grand style of the 1920s. A wraparound porch supported by whole tree trunks circled the first floor. Tall windows reflected the late afternoon sun like hundreds of golden eyes. Snow clung to the steep roof lines and gathered in pristine drifts around the foundation. "Dad," Emma whispered, "this isn't some run-down cabin. This is a palace." David stared through the windshield, his heart hammering. The lawyer had mentioned maintenance issues, had emphasized the remote location and years of vacancy. But from here, it looked magnificent, like something that belonged on the cover of a luxury travel magazine. They drove slowly down the gravel driveway, stones crunching under their tires. The closer they got, the more details emerged. Some upper windows were boarded with weather-stained plywood. The porch railings showed patches where boards had been replaced. But the overall structure looked solid, imposing, almost defiant against the mountain backdrop. A wooden sign hung above the main entrance, its carved letters still legible despite years of weather. Glacier Peak Lodge, established 1924. David parked in front of the main entrance and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than any quiet he'd ever experienced. No traffic, no neighbors, no city sounds, just wind sighing through the pines and the distant murmur of running water. "It's so quiet," Emma said softly. "Like we're the only people left in the world." David pulled out the envelope the lawyer had given him. 3 keys, 1 modern brass key, 2 that looked antique, made of darker metal with elaborate heads. A note identified them: main entrance, office, and something labeled simply, "private access." They stepped out into air so clean it made David's chest ache. The cold was immediate and sharp, carrying scents of pine needles and snow, and something wilder, the smell of a place where humans were temporary visitors. Emma walked to the edge of the porch and turned in a slow circle, taking in mountains that rose on all sides like the walls of some impossible cathedral. "Dad, people would pay thousands of dollars just to breathe this air. David fitted the main key into the massive oak door, surprised when it turned smoothly. The lock had been maintained, recently oiled. The door swung open with a deep groan that echoed across the valley. Inside, their footsteps rang on polished marble floors. The lobby was vast, with a ceiling that soared 30 feet overhead, supported by log beams that must have come from trees centuries old. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, built from river rocks and easily large enough to roast an entire elk. Leather furniture was arranged in conversation groups, all covered with white dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. Emma pulled away one of the sheets, revealing a burgundy leather armchair that looked like it had never been used. "Dad, this furniture is beautiful. And look at this fireplace. You could park our car in there." David walked deeper into the lobby, his eyes adjusting to the golden light filtering through tall windows. Everything was dusty but intact. No vandalism, no signs of break-ins, no evidence that anyone unauthorized had been here since the day it closed. The check-in desk was carved from dark wood, with an antique brass cash register positioned exactly where a guest would expect to find it. Behind the desk, a wooden board held room keys, hanging from brass hooks, numbered 1 through 62, as if the staff had just stepped out for lunch. "Emma, come, look at this." She joined him behind the desk, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. "What is it?" David pointed to a leather-bound guest registry lying open on the counter. The last entry was dated October 15th, 5 years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, Seattle, WA. Room 23. 2 nights. Under comments, someone had written in careful script, "Absolutely magical. Will definitely return next year." Emma traced the handwriting with her finger. "They never got to come back, did they?" "Hotel closed that winter," David said. "Charles became a recluse after his wife died." They spent the next 2 hours exploring the first floor. The dining room could seat 100 guests, with tables still set for service that would never come. White tablecloths, polished silverware, crystal wine glasses that caught and scattered light like small prisms. The kitchen was commercial grade, with walk-in refrigerators and gas ranges that could feed an army. Everything clean, everything waiting. "Dad," Emma said as they stood in the center of the kitchen, "this place wasn't just closed. It was preserved, like someone was planning to reopen it but never got the chance." David nodded, but something nagged at him. If Uncle Charles had planned to reopen, why leave it to a nephew he'd never contacted? Why not sell it to someone who actually knew the hospitality business? They climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, their hands trailing along a banister worn smooth by decades of use. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors bearing brass numbers. David tested his key on room 12. Inside was a perfectly appointed guest room. King bed with a hand-quilted coverlet, antique armoire, bathroom with a clawfoot tub that belonged in a Victorian mansion. Fresh towels hung on heated racks. Toiletries sat, arranged on the marble vanity. Emma tested the faucets. "Dad, everything works. Hot water, electricity, heat. How is that possible if this place has been closed for 5 years?" David had been wondering the same thing. Someone had been maintaining this place, keeping it ready. But for what? For whom? "This is so sad," Emma said, standing at the window that overlooked the valley. "All these beautiful rooms, just sitting empty. All this space and luxury, and nobody gets to enjoy it." They explored more rooms, each one immaculate, each one ready for guests who would never come. By the time they returned to the lobby, the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson that David had never imagined possible. He stood at the tall windows, looking out over their inheritance. 62 rooms, commercial kitchen, dining facilities, conference rooms, and enough land to build a small town. All of it theirs, somehow, through the generosity of a man he'd never known existed. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, joining him at the window. David thought about Sarah, about the dreams they'd shared during late-night conversations when Emma was small and sleeping peacefully in the next room. Sarah had always wanted to run a bed and breakfast someday, somewhere peaceful and beautiful, where people could escape from the chaos of modern life. "I'm thinking your mother would have loved this place," he said quietly. "She always said she wanted to run a place like this, somewhere with mountains and clean air." Emma slipped her hand into his. "Maybe that's why we're here. Maybe Uncle Charles somehow knew what Mom dreamed about." That evening, they made beds in adjoining rooms on the second floor, using sleeping bags they'd bought in Anchorage. David lay awake listening to the sounds of the old building settling around them, timber creaking as temperatures dropped, wind rattling windows, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. But underneath all those familiar sounds was something else. A faint humming, rhythmic and mechanical, like machinery running somewhere far below. He strained to isolate it, holding his breath and focusing all his attention. But every time he thought he had it pinned down, it seemed to fade into the background noise. Probably just the heating system, he told himself. Old buildings made all kinds of sounds. Boilers cycling, pipes expanding and contracting. The natural settling of a structure that had weathered decades of harsh mountain winters. He was finally drifting towards sleep when Emma's voice came through the wall between their rooms. "Dad? Do you hear that humming sound?" David's eyes opened in the darkness. "Yeah, I hear it." "Where do you think it's coming from?" David listened more carefully. The sound was definitely there, constant and faint, like an engine idling deep underground. "I don't know, Em. We'll investigate tomorrow. It sounds like it's coming from way below us. Like, way, way below." As David finally fell asleep in his inherited palace of logs and stone, he found himself wondering what kind of machinery would still be running in a hotel that had been closed for 5 years. And why Uncle Charles, a man who had lived as a hermit for the final years of his life, had maintained a luxury lodge in pristine condition for guests who never came. Tomorrow would bring answers to some questions and raise others they couldn't have imagined. Tomorrow they would discover that the Glacier Peak Lodge was far more than it appeared to be, and that their inheritance came with secrets that would change their understanding of everything. But tonight, David Matthews fell asleep dreaming of second chances, wondering if sometimes the universe really did conspire to put the right people in the right place at exactly the right moment. Dawn broke over the Alaska mountains like a whisper of gold across endless peaks, and David woke to the sound of Emma, already moving around in the next room. He checked his watch, 6:30 in the morning, but his internal clock was still confused by the journey and the strange dreams that had haunted his sleep. Dreams of machinery humming in the depths of the earth, of his dead wife Sarah walking through empty hotel corridors, of Uncle Charles standing in shadows with secrets written across his face. David pulled on his clothes and found Emma in the hotel's kitchen, standing at the massive commercial stove with a look of determination that reminded him painfully of her mother. "I found coffee in the pantry," she announced, holding up a can of grounds that looked recent enough to be safe. "And Dad, you need to see something." She led him to a walk-in pantry that was larger than their entire kitchen back in Ohio. The shelves were stocked with canned goods, dry goods, even frozen meals in the industrial freezer. Enough food to last months. "Look at the expiration dates." Emma said, pointing to a row of canned tomatoes. David checked the labels. Everything was current. Some items dated just weeks ago. Someone's been shopping for this place recently. And look at this. Emma pulled out a spiral notebook tucked between boxes of pasta. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in careful script. Monthly supply order. March. Heating system maintenance. Every 6 weeks. Generator test. First of each month. David flipped through the pages, finding detailed maintenance schedules, supplier contact information, and what looked like a guest reservation system that had been carefully maintained despite the hotel being closed. The last entry was dated just 2 months ago. Emma. Either Uncle Charles was planning something before he died, or someone else has been taking care of this place. They made coffee using the professional espresso machine, which worked perfectly, and sat in the dining room as morning light streamed through tall windows. The view was breathtaking. Mountain peaks touched with snow, a valley carpeted in deep green, and not a single sign of human presence except for the lodge itself. "Dad, about that humming sound last night," Emma said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's too regular to be plumbing or heating. It sounds like machinery running on a schedule." David had reached the same conclusion. The sound was too consistent, too rhythmic to be random building noises. "Let's do a systematic exploration today. Map out the building. Look for anything that doesn't make sense." They started with the first floor, moving methodically through each room. The hotel was larger than David had initially realized. Not just the main lobby and dining areas, but a series of smaller rooms tucked behind the public spaces. A library with leather-bound books and comfortable reading chairs. A billiards room with a table that looked like it cost more than David's car. A small theater with 12 plush seats, facing a screen that could be lowered from the ceiling. "Dad, this is like a resort for rich people," Emma said, running her hand along the felt of the billiard table. "This isn't just a hotel. It's like a private club." In what appeared to be the manager's office behind the front desk, David found filing cabinets filled with records that painted a picture of the Glacier Peak Lodge's history. Guest lists from the 1980s and 90s read like a who's who of politicians, business leaders, and celebrities. Reservation records showed that guests often stayed for weeks at a time, returning year after year. "Look at these names," Emma said, reading over his shoulder. "Senators, CEOs, even a few movie stars. This place wasn't just successful, it was exclusive." But the record stopped abruptly 5 years ago, just as the lawyer had said. The final entries showed reservation cancellations, staff dismissals, and a note in Uncle Charles's handwriting. "Lodge closed indefinitely, due to personal circumstances." It was while they were exploring the second floor that Emma made the first discovery that didn't make sense. "Dad, come here. Look at this hallway." She was standing at the end of the east wing, where the corridor seemed to terminate in a large window overlooking the valley. But something about the proportions bothered her. "Count the windows from outside," she said. "From the dining room, you can see 7 windows on this side of the building. But from inside, we've only passed 6 guest rooms." David walked back down the hallway, counting doors. Emma was right. 6 guest rooms, but the building was clearly longer than that from the outside. There should be another room here. They examined the end wall carefully. It looked solid, covered with the same wood paneling as the rest of the hallway. But when David knocked on it, the sound was hollow. "Emma, this wall is fake. There's space behind it." They spent 20 minutes searching for any kind of opening. A hidden catch, a concealed door handle, anything. Finally, Emma noticed that one section of the wood paneling was slightly different from the rest, the grain running in a different direction. "Dad, try pushing here." David pressed against the section Emma had identified, and after a moment of resistance, it gave way with a soft click. A hidden door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Oh my God," Emma breathed. Uncle Charles built secret passages in his hotel. David pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight app. The stairs were steep and narrow, built from the same stone as the hotel's foundation. They descended carefully, the humming sound growing noticeably louder with each step. The staircase opened into a corridor carved directly from the mountain rock, with electric lights mounted on the walls every 10 feet. The lights were on, casting a warm glow that made the underground space feel less threatening than David had expected. "Someone's definitely been down here recently," Emma observed, pointing to fresh footprints in the dust that covered the stone floor. The corridor stretched ahead of them, with several doors branching off to either side. The first door they tried opened into what appeared to be a storage room, filled with hotel linens and cleaning supplies. The second revealed a workshop equipped with tools and equipment for maintaining the hotel's mechanical systems. But it was the third door that made David's breath catch in his throat. The room beyond was an office, but unlike any office he'd ever seen. The walls were lined with monitors displaying security camera feeds from throughout the hotel. The lobby, the dining room, the corridors, even the approach road where they'd driven in yesterday. The feeds were live, showing their Jeep still parked outside the main entrance. "Dad," Uncle Charles was watching everything from down here. A desk in the center of the room held multiple computers, all powered on and humming quietly. File cabinets lined one wall, and Emma noticed that they were labeled with codes rather than normal filing system labels. David sat down at the main computer terminal. The screen showed a complex interface that looked like building management software. Temperature controls for different zones of the hotel, security system, status, power management, and what appeared to be inventory tracking. "This is incredible," he murmured, clicking through different screens. He was running the entire hotel from this hidden office. Emma opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder marked Project Overview. Inside were architectural drawings that showed the hotel as David and Emma knew it, but with an additional level marked below the foundation. The drawings were labeled Sublevel Access to Construction. "Dad, there's more. There's another level below this one." David studied the architectural drawings. The sublevel was enormous, stretching far beyond the footprint of the hotel above. Multiple rooms, corridors, and what appeared to be some kind of large central chamber. "What was Uncle Charles building down here?" Emma asked. Before David could answer, they heard a sound that made them both freeze. The unmistakable hum of an elevator operating somewhere nearby. They followed the sound through another door at the back of the office, finding themselves in a small chamber that housed a modern freight elevator. The indicator lights showed that the elevator was currently moving between floors, though David couldn't tell if it was coming up or going down. "Dad, someone else is down here." David's protective instincts kicked in immediately. We need to get back upstairs. Now." But before they could move, the elevator stopped, and the doors opened with a soft chime. Instead of a person, however, the elevator car contained a single item, a manila envelope with David Matthews written across it in the same careful handwriting they'd seen in the maintenance logs. Emma looked at her father. "Should we?" David reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a brass key that looked older than the hotel itself. The letter was brief. David, if you're reading this, then you've found the first level of what I've been building. You and Emma are braver than I hoped, and smarter than I dared expect. The key will take you to the heart of everything. Follow the elevator to Sublevel 2. What you find there will change your understanding of why I chose you. Trust your instincts. Trust each other. And remember that some secrets are kept not to hide shame, but to protect wonder. Uncle Charles. Emma stared at the letter. Dad, Uncle Charles, wrote this recently. How is that possible if he died weeks ago? David examined the paper. The ink, the handwriting, everything looked fresh, as if the letter had been written yesterday. I don't know, Em. Nothing about this makes sense. They stood in front of the open elevator, the brass key warm in David's palm. The elevator car was obviously waiting for them, and David could see that the control panel had buttons for 3 levels: ground floor, sublevel 1, where they currently were, and sublevel 2. We're going down there, aren't we? Emma asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. David thought about their options. They could return to the surface, pack up their few belongings, and leave Alaska forever. Go back to Ohio, find another apartment they couldn't afford, and pretend this strange inheritance had never happened. Or they could follow the mystery deeper. Trust Uncle Charles's words about protecting wonder, and discover what lay beneath the mountain lodge that had been left to them by a man who seemed to have known them better than they knew themselves. What happens next will turn this mystery upside down, reveal a truth that defies imagination, and show David and Emma that their inheritance is far more valuable than they could have dreamed. Stay tuned to see what waits in the depths below. If you're enjoying this journey, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Yeah, David said, stepping into the elevator with Emma beside him. We're going down. The elevator descended smoothly, and David could feel the change in air pressure as they went deeper into the mountain. The descent seemed to take much longer than it should have, and when the doors finally opened, they stepped out into a space that made David question everything he thought he understood about reality. They were standing in a vast underground chamber, its ceiling disappearing into shadows high above. But this wasn't a rough cave or utilitarian basement. The space had been finished with the same attention to luxury and detail as the hotel above. Polished marble floors, elegant lighting, and what appeared to be climate control systems that kept the temperature perfectly comfortable. But it was what filled the chamber that made Emma gasp and David's knees go weak. Cars. Dozens of them, arranged in perfect rows like a museum display. Not just any cars. Vintage automobiles that David recognized from magazines and movies. A 1955 gull-wing Mercedes gleamed under soft spotlights. A 1963 Corvette split window sat beside what looked like an original Shelby Cobra. Each vehicle was positioned on a raised platform with a small brass plaque containing information about the car's history and provenance. Dad, Emma whispered, we're not just looking at cars. We're looking at millions of dollars worth of automotive history. David walked slowly through the collection, reading the plaques. 1957 Ferrari, 250 GT, one of only 36 ever made. 1938 Bugatti Type, 57, previously owned by the Shah of Iran. 1970 McLaren F1, number 15 of 64, produced. At the far end of the chamber, another elevator waited. This one had a sign posted beside it. Sublevel 3. Authorized personnel only. Emma looked at the brass key still clutched in her father's hand. "Dad, I think we're the authorized personnel now." But David was staring at something else. A framed photograph hanging on the wall beside the elevator. It showed Uncle Charles as a younger man, standing beside a woman with Emma's eyes and David's father's smile. They were posed in front of what looked like the hotel lobby upstairs, but the woman looked familiar in a way that made David's chest tight. Below the photograph, a caption in Uncle Charles's handwriting: Charles and Margaret Matthews, 1978, Glacier Peak Lodge, grand opening. "Emma, look at this woman. Doesn't she look familiar to you?" Emma studied the photograph closely, then pulled out her phone and scrolled to a picture of her mother. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable. The shape of the eyes, the way they smiled, the angle of their cheekbones. "Dad, she looks like Mom. A lot like Mom." David stared at the photograph, his mind racing. What if Uncle Charles didn't just randomly choose us to inherit this place? What if he'd been watching our family for a long time? They rode the elevator down to Sublevel 3 in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about family connections they'd never known existed, and the growing realization that their inheritance came with mysteries that stretched back decades. When the elevator doors opened on the third level, David and Emma stepped into a space that defied comprehension. If Sublevel 2 had been impressive, Sublevel 3 was overwhelming. The chamber was even larger than the one above, but instead of cars, it housed what could only be described as treasure. Display cases lined the walls, filled with artifacts that belonged in the world's greatest museums. Ancient pottery, medieval manuscripts, jewelry that sparkled with gems David couldn't identify, artwork that he recognized from art history textbooks. In the center of the chamber stood a desk much like the one they'd found in the office above. But this desk was clearly the command center for something much larger than hotel management. Multiple computer screens showed what appeared to be security feeds from locations around the world. Stock market tickers scrolled across other monitors. Communication equipment that looked military-grade hummed quietly on specialized tables. And beside the desk, a single chair was positioned as if someone had just stepped away moments before their arrival. On the desk's surface, another envelope waited with their names written across it in Uncle Charles's careful script. David opened this letter with hands that shook slightly. Emma, reading over his shoulder. "David and Emma, welcome to the heart of everything I've spent 30 years building. What you see around you represents not just wealth, but responsibility. I have been a guardian of beautiful things that the world might otherwise lose to war, greed, or simple neglect. Each item in this collection has been legally acquired and carefully preserved, waiting for the right moment to serve its higher purpose. You are here not because you are my blood relatives, though that connection matters, but because you understand loss. You value things that cannot be replaced, and you have the courage to protect what needs protecting. The collection you see is worth approximately $290 million, but its true value cannot be measured in money. These are pieces of human history, creativity, and achievement that belong not to any one person, but to the future. I am trusting you with more than wealth, David. I am trusting you with the guardianship of wonder itself. The choice is yours to make. You can reveal this place to the world and watch it be carved up by governments and institutions and lawyers. You can sell what you choose and live comfortably for the rest of your lives. Or you can accept the responsibility I'm offering you to become the next guardians of this collection, to add to it when the opportunity arises, and to ensure that these treasures survive for generations yet to come. The hotel above provides perfect cover for the work that happens below. Reopen it. Make it successful again. Let it fund its own operation. But know that your real calling will be down here, in the deep places where beauty waits patiently for those brave enough to protect it. I have left you everything you need to continue this work. Accounts, contacts, legal documentation, and most importantly, a purpose worthy of your courage. Choose carefully, but choose together. The future is waiting for your answer. David set the letter down with hands that trembled slightly. He looked around at the impossible wealth that surrounded them, then at his 15-year-old daughter, who was staring at ancient artifacts with the same wonder she'd once reserved for Christmas morning. What do you think? Are we brave enough for this? Prius. Rituda. Emma walked slowly through the collection, stopping in front of a display case that held what appeared to be illuminated medieval manuscripts. Dad, do you remember what Mom used to say about why she became a teacher? David smiled despite the overwhelming nature of their situation. She said she wanted to be a bridge between the past and the future, to help make sure that beautiful things didn't get forgotten. Uncle Charles was doing the same thing, wasn't he? Just on a much bigger scale. Count subscribe. Count subscribe. Count subscribe. I won count subscribe. David nodded, understanding flooding through him. This wasn't just about inheriting money or property. Uncle Charles had chosen them to continue work that mattered. Work that would outlast their own lives and benefit people they would never meet. So what do we do? He asked his daughter, realizing that her opinion mattered as much as his own. Emma looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the ancient pottery, the priceless paintings, the jewelry that had once adorned royalty, and the high-tech equipment that kept it all safe and secure. We learn, she said simply, we learn how to be worthy of this trust. We, as father and daughter, stood together in a treasure vault carved from the heart of an Alaskan mountain, surrounded by $290 million worth of human achievement. They began to understand that their inheritance was not just wealth, but purpose. Uncle Charles had spent 3 decades building something extraordinary, something that transcended ordinary ideas of ownership and profit. Now that responsibility belonged to them. The question was whether they could rise to meet it. Above them, 3 levels up, the Glacier Peak Lodge waited in pristine silence for guests who had no idea that they would be staying above one of the world's most remarkable private collections. Below them, machinery hummed quietly, maintaining perfect conditions for treasures that would outlast empires. And in between, David and Emma Matthews began planning for a future they could never have imagined, guided by the wisdom of a man they'd never met, but who had somehow known exactly who they would become when challenged to be their best selves. The adventure was just beginning. The weight of Uncle Charles's letter seemed to press down on David and Emma as they stood in the treasure vault, 3 levels beneath the Glacier Peak Lodge. $290 million worth of artifacts surrounded them, each piece carefully preserved and displayed like items in the world's most exclusive museum. But the true weight they felt wasn't the value of the collection. It was the responsibility that came with it. Emma was the first to move, walking toward a display case that held what appeared to be ancient Egyptian artifacts. Her reflection multiplied in the glass as she leaned closer, studying a golden scarab beetle that seemed to glow with inner fire under the carefully positioned lighting. Dad, look at the detail on this. Every tiny hieroglyph is perfect. David joined her, reading the small brass placard beside the case. Egyptian Royal Scarab, Dynasty 18, approximately 1500 BC. Acquired from the estate of Lord Pemberton, 1987. Provenance verified by the British Museum, 1500 BC, Emma whispered. Dad, this thing is over 3,000 years old. Someone made this before the pyramids were finished. They moved methodically through the chamber. And with each display case, David's understanding of Uncle Charles grew more complex. This wasn't the random accumulation of a wealthy collector. Every piece had been chosen with scholarly precision, documented with academic rigor, and preserved with museum-quality care. A case containing medieval manuscripts drew Emma's attention next. The pages were illuminated with gold leaf and vibrant inks that looked as fresh as the day they were created. Book of Hours, created for the Duke of Burgundy, 1423. She read aloud. Dad? Monks spent years creating books like this by hand. Each page is a work of art. David found himself standing before a painting that made his breath catch. A small canvas that depicted water lilies floating on a pond, painted with brushstrokes that seemed to capture light itself. The placard identified it as a Monet, painted in 1919, acquired from a private collection in 1994. This is worth millions by itself. Just this one painting, but it was what they found in the far corner of the chamber that truly revealed the scope of Uncle Charles's activities. Behind an elegant wooden screen, they discovered what could only be described as a research library. Hundreds of books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, art history texts, archaeological journals, auction catalogues dating back decades, reference works in multiple languages, correspondence files, and what appeared to be detailed provenance research for every item in the collection. Emma pulled out a thick folder labeled Acquisition History, Ancient Greek Pottery. Inside were photographs, letters from university professors, export permits, and detailed scholarly analysis of pieces that Uncle Charles had acquired over the years. Dad, listen to this letter. It's from a professor at Oxford. Dear Charles, thank you for allowing our research team to study the amphora collection. Your willingness to make these pieces available to scholars has contributed significantly to our understanding of 5th century Athenian pottery techniques. We hope you will consider loaning several pieces for our upcoming exhibition. David was reading through another folder, this one containing correspondence with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Emma, Uncle Charles wasn't just collecting these things. He was working with museums, universities, researchers around the world. Look at this. He loaned a Roman statue to the Met for 3 years. People got to see it, study it, learn from it. They spent hours going through the files, piecing together the story of Uncle Charles's secret life. He had been far more than a reclusive hotel owner. He had been a scholar, a patron of the arts, a guardian of cultural treasures who operated quietly behind the scenes of the international art world. Here's something interesting, Emma said, holding up a folder marked Rescue Acquisitions. Inside were documents showing that Uncle Charles had purchased artifacts from war zones, natural disaster areas, and countries experiencing political upheaval. Dad, he wasn't just buying things for himself. He was saving them. 10 spans. The folder contained photographs that told dramatic stories. Ancient sculptures pulled from bombed museums, manuscripts rescued from flooded libraries, artifacts purchased from looters to prevent them from disappearing into private collections where they would never be seen again. A letter from a UNESCO official painted a clearer picture. Mr. Matthews, your quick action in acquiring the Syrian manuscripts has undoubtedly saved them from destruction. We understand your desire to maintain the collection in secure, climate-controlled conditions until the political situation stabilizes. Please know that the international community is grateful for your stewardship of these irreplaceable historical documents. Emma. Uncle Charles was like a one-man cultural rescue operation. He was saving things that would have been lost forever. But the folder that truly explained everything was labeled simply personal. Inside, they found photographs spanning 5 decades, showing Uncle Charles's transformation from a young businessman to the guardian of wonders they were beginning to understand. The earliest photos showed a man in his 20s, standing in front of various businesses, technology companies. David realized, reading the signs in the background, there were patents, stock certificates, and newspaper clippings from the early days of the computer industry. Uncle Charles had been involved in developing components that became standard in personal computers. Dad, look at this stock certificate. Uncle Charles owned shares in companies that became Microsoft and Apple. He sold his technology patents in 1983 for $57 million. But the most revealing photographs came later, showing Uncle Charles with a woman who looked remarkably like Sarah. The resemblance was so strong that David's hands shook as he held the pictures. That's Margaret, Emma said, reading the back of one photo. Remember the caption we saw upstairs? Charles and Margaret Matthews, 1978. The photos told a love story that explained everything. Charles and Margaret, at art museums, at archaeological dig sites, at auction houses around the world. Margaret was clearly the scholar of the pair. Many photos showed her examining artifacts, taking notes, discussing pieces with experts and curators, but then the photos changed. Margaret began appearing with a cane, then a wheelchair. The final photos showed her in what was obviously a care facility. Still beautiful, but with the vacant expression of someone whose mind had been claimed by disease. A letter in Uncle Charles's handwriting, addressed to Margaret but apparently never sent, provided the heartbreaking context. My darling Margaret, the doctors say you won't remember me tomorrow, but I will remember enough for both of us. I've decided to continue building our collection, not because you can appreciate it anymore, but because somewhere in the world there are other people who will see these treasures with the same wonder you once did. If I can preserve them until those people find them, then your passion for beauty will never truly die. Emma wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading the letter. Dad, he built all of this for her, and when she couldn't enjoy it anymore, he kept building it for people like us. David found another folder. This one, containing recent surveillance photos that made his blood run cold. Pictures of himself and Emma going about their daily lives in Ohio. Emma walking to school, David at construction sites, both of them at Sarah's funeral. Uncle Charles had been watching their family for years, documenting their struggles, waiting for the right moment to step into their lives. He knew about us, David said quietly. He knew about Mom's cancer, the medical bills, the eviction notice. He was waiting until we had nothing left to lose before he offered us everything we needed. But the folder also contained research that Uncle Charles had done into their family history. Genealogical charts showed that Margaret, Uncle Charles's deceased wife, had been related to Sarah's grandmother. The connection was distant but real. Third cousins, separated by geography, but connected by blood. That's why Mom looked like Margaret, Emma realized. They were family. Uncle Charles didn't just choose us randomly. We're connected to the woman he built all this for. In the deepest section of the personal files, They found Uncle Charles's journals, handwritten volumes that chronicled his transformation from technology entrepreneur to cultural guardian. The early entries were filled with excitement about new acquisitions, pride in successful rescues of endangered artifacts, and detailed plans for expanding the collection. But the later entries revealed a man grappling with mortality and legacy. "I am 74 years old," one entry read, "and I have assembled one of the most significant private collections of cultural artifacts in the world. But what good does it do if it dies with me? I need to find people who understand that true wealth is not in owning beautiful things, but in ensuring they survive for future generations to discover and appreciate." The final entries in the most recent journal made David's hands shake as he read them aloud to Emma. "I have been watching the Matthews family for 3 years now. David is struggling, but he has not given up hope. Emma shows the same intellectual curiosity that made Margaret such a gifted researcher. Sarah's death was tragic, but it has taught both David and Emma the true value of things that cannot be replaced. They are ready, though they do not yet know it. The accident that killed me was not an accident." The final entry continued, "I am old, and my body is failing, but my mind remains clear. I have arranged things so that David and Emma will inherit not just my collection, but my mission. The automated systems will continue operating the hotel and maintaining the collection until they are ready to take over. I have left them everything they need to succeed, including detailed instructions for adding to the collection, working with museums and universities, and most importantly, identifying and training the next generation of guardians." Emma closed the journal with trembling hands. "Dad, Uncle Charles planned his own death, so we could inherit this at exactly the right moment." David felt the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. Not just the responsibility for priceless artifacts, but the realization that Uncle Charles had sacrificed his remaining years to ensure that his life's work would continue. He gave up the rest of his life for us. For this, they spent the remainder of the day exploring every corner of the underground complex. Behind the main display area, they found climate-controlled storage rooms containing artifacts that hadn't yet been put on display. Workshop areas where Uncle Charles had apparently done restoration work on damaged pieces. A library containing research materials in multiple languages. Communication equipment that connected to universities, museums, and auction houses around the world. Most impressively, they discovered that Uncle Charles had established a network of contacts, scholars, curators, dealers, and collectors who had been working with him for decades. A computer terminal contained encrypted communication logs showing ongoing conversations about potential acquisitions, research collaborations, and loan arrangements with institutions worldwide. "Dad, look at this email thread. It's from last month." Emma was reading correspondence on one of the computer screens. "A professor in Cairo is asking Uncle Charles about loaning some Egyptian pieces for an exhibition next year. Someone named Dr. Rahman says the Cairo Museum would love to display some items from the Glacier Peak collection alongside their permanent exhibits." David read over her shoulder. Uncle Charles was operating like a major museum. He had professional relationships with institutions around the world. But the most significant discovery came when they found Uncle Charles's master plan for the collection's future. In a secure filing cabinet, they discovered detailed documents outlining how the Glacier Peak Foundation should operate after his death. The plan was comprehensive and brilliant. The hotel above would be reopened as a luxury lodge, generating income to fund the foundation's activities. Selected scholars and researchers would be invited to study the collection, with their findings published in academic journals. Portions of the collection would be loaned to major museums for public exhibitions. New acquisitions would be made carefully, focusing on pieces that needed rescue or preservation. Most importantly, the plan included provisions for identifying and training future guardians. The collection must never belong to any one person or family permanently, Uncle Charles had written. Each generation of guardians should identify and prepare the next, ensuring that the mission continues even as individuals age and pass away. Emma found a sealed envelope marked "For Emma," to be opened on her 21st birthday. Inside was a letter outlining Uncle Charles's hopes that Emma would pursue advanced degrees in art history and museum studies, positioning herself to become a professional guardian of the collection. "He saw my future before I did," Emma said wonderingly. "Dad, he wants me to become a real curator, to turn this into my career." David found his own sealed envelope, labeled "For David, Leadership Guidelines." The letter inside outlined detailed plans for reopening the hotel, establishing the foundation as a legal entity, and building relationships with the international art community. He's giving us a roadmap for the rest of our lives. He's not just leaving us money, he's leaving us purpose. As evening approached and they prepared to return to the surface, David and Emma stood together in the center of the treasure vault, looking around at artifacts that spanned millennia of human creativity and achievement. "Dad, are you scared?" Emma asked. David considered the question honestly. "Terrified," he admitted. "This is bigger than anything I ever imagined being responsible for. But also what? Also excited. For the first time since your mother died, I feel like our lives could matter for something bigger than just survival." Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Uncle Charles didn't just rescue artifacts from destruction, he rescued us too. They rode the elevator back to the surface in contemplative silence, each lost in thoughts about the magnitude of what they had inherited. The hotel lobby looked exactly as they had left it that morning, but everything felt different now. They were no longer just David and Emma Matthews, struggling to make ends meet in Ohio. They were the guardians of one of the world's most significant private collections of cultural treasures. That night, as they sat in the hotel dining room eating a simple dinner they had prepared from supplies in the pantry, Emma asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Dad, what do we tell people? When they ask what we're doing in Alaska, what do we say?" David had been thinking about the same thing. "I think we tell them we're reopening the hotel. That's true. It's just not the whole truth. And the collection stays secret until we understand it better. Until we know who we can trust." Emma nodded, but David could see she was still processing everything they had discovered. "Dad, do you think Uncle Charles was right about us? Do you think we're really the right people for this?" David looked at his 15-year-old daughter, who had spent the day examining priceless artifacts with the reverence of a scholar and reading academic correspondence with genuine understanding, who had grasped immediately the difference between owning beautiful things and protecting them for future generations. "I think Uncle Charles saw something in us that we didn't even see in ourselves. And I think maybe that's what makes us the right choice." Outside the dining room windows, the Alaska wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. Mountains and forests, unmarked by human presence, but 3 levels beneath their feet, in chambers carved from the heart of the mountain itself, $290 million worth of human achievement, waited patiently for the next chapter of its long journey through time. David and Emma Matthews had inherited more than money, more than property, more than they could have imagined possible. They had inherited a mission that would define the rest of their lives, connecting them to scholars and institutions around the world, making them guardians of treasures that belonged not to any individual, but to all of humanity. The real adventure was just beginning. The first threat came exactly 1 week after David and Emma had discovered the underground collection. David was in the hotel kitchen, working through Uncle Charles's detailed manual for operating the commercial equipment, when Emma burst through the doors with panic in her eyes. "Dad, there are cars coming up the driveway. Expensive cars, and they don't look like tourists." David followed Emma to the front windows of the lobby, where they watched 3 black SUVs with tinted windows navigate the winding gravel road toward the hotel. The vehicles moved with purpose, their occupants clearly familiar with the route. "Someone knows we're here," David said quietly. "And they know what we found." The SUVs parked in a precise formation in front of the hotel, and 6 people emerged. They wore expensive suits that looked out of place in the Alaska wilderness, and they moved with the coordinated efficiency of a military unit. The leader was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and cold eyes that seemed to take inventory of everything they saw. David opened the front door before they could knock, positioning himself protectively in front of Emma. "Mr. Matthews," the woman said, her voice carrying an accent David couldn't place. "My name is Victoria Kane. I represent certain parties who have a significant interest in your uncle's collection." "I'm not sure what you're talking about," David replied carefully. "This is a hotel. We're planning to reopen it." Victoria smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Mr. Matthews, please don't insult my intelligence. Charles Matthews spent 30 years assembling one of the most significant private collections of cultural artifacts in the world. Our research indicates it includes pieces that rightfully belong to various museums and governments." Emma stepped forward, surprising David with her composure. "What kind of research? And who exactly are you representing?" "I represent a consortium of international collectors and institutions who believe that certain pieces in your uncle's collection were acquired through questionable means. We're prepared to offer you $50 million for the entire collection. No questions asked." David felt his blood run cold. $50 million was an enormous sum, but it was less than 20% of what Uncle Charles had documented as the collection's true value. "And if we're not interested in selling," Victoria's smile became predatory, "then we would be forced to contact various government agencies who might be very interested to learn about illegal antiquities trafficking. The Syrian manuscripts alone would generate significant international attention." "Those manuscripts were rescued from a war zone," Emma said hotly. "Uncle Charles saved them from being destroyed. Can you prove that in court, Miss Matthews? Can you provide documentation that would satisfy investigators from Syria, UNESCO, and the FBI?" Victoria pulled out a tablet and showed them photographs of some of the artifacts from the underground collection. "We know exactly what's down there. We know how much it's worth. And we know that a construction worker from Ohio has no legal standing to possess items of this significance." David's mind raced. How did they know about the collection? How had they gotten photographs? Who told you about the underground levels? Your uncle had business relationships with many people over the years. Not all of them were as discreet as he believed. Victoria gestured to one of her companions, who stepped forward with a briefcase. $50 million, Mr. Matthews. Enough to set you and your daughter up for life. All you have to do is sign a transfer of ownership and walk away." "We need time to think about it," David said. Victoria's expression hardened. "You have 24 hours. After that, we'll be forced to pursue other options. After the SUVs disappeared down the mountain road, David and Emma sat in stunned silence in the hotel lobby. "Dad, they had photos of the collection. How is that possible?" David had been wondering the same thing. Uncle Charles must have worked with dealers, auction houses, other collectors over the years. Someone betrayed him. Emma pulled out one of Uncle Charles's journals they had brought upstairs from the vault. "Dad, listen to this entry from 6 months ago. I am concerned that certain parties in the international art market have become suspicious of my activities. There have been too many inquiries about pieces in my collection. I may need to accelerate my timeline for transferring guardianship to David and Emma." He knew this was coming, David realized. That's why he arranged his death when he did. He was trying to get the collection to us before these people could interfere. They spent the rest of the day going through Uncle Charles's files, trying to understand who might have leaked information about the collection. What they found was more disturbing than they had expected. In a folder marked "Security Concerns," Uncle Charles had documented a pattern of pressure from various parties who wanted access to his collection. Art dealers who claimed certain pieces had been stolen from their inventories. Government officials from countries claiming cultural patrimony rights. Private collectors who insisted they had been cheated in past transactions. "Dad, Uncle Charles was fighting off vultures for years. People who wanted to tear apart his collection and sell it piece by piece. But they also found something else. A network of allies that Uncle Charles had cultivated over decades. Museum directors who vouched for his integrity. Scholars who confirmed the legitimate provenance of controversial pieces. Legal experts who had helped him navigate the complex world of international art law. We're not alone in this. Uncle Charles left us a whole support network." That evening, David made the first of what would become many crucial phone calls. Dr. Sarah Chen, director of ancient art at the Metropolitan Museum, was the first person on Uncle Charles's contact list. "Dr. Chen, this is David Matthews. I inherited Charles Matthews's collection, and I need help." "David, Charles spoke of you and Emma often. I was wondering when I would hear from you." Dr. Chen's voice was warm but concerned. "What kind of help do you need?" David explained about Victoria Kane's visit and the threats they had received. Dr. Chen listened in increasingly alarmed silence. "David, what you're describing sounds like the Marchetti Group. They're raiders who target private collections and use legal intimidation to force sales at below-market prices. They've destroyed several important collections over the past decade. What can we do? First, don't sign anything. Second, understand that Charles's collection is entirely legitimate. I've personally verified the provenance of dozens of pieces over the years. Third, you need to contact Marcus Webb immediately. He's a lawyer who specializes in cultural property law, and he worked with Charles for 20 years. The next morning, David was on a conference call with Marcus Webb, Dr. Chen, and 3 other museum directors from around the world. The picture they painted was sobering, but not hopeless. The Marchetti Group operates by finding legal gray areas and exploiting them, Marcus explained. But Charles was meticulous about documentation. Every piece in his collection was acquired legally, and we have the paperwork to prove it. The Syrian manuscripts are a perfect example, added Dr. Chen. Charles didn't steal them. He purchased them from a dealer who had rescued them from a bombed museum in Aleppo. Charles then worked with Syrian scholars to catalogue and study them, with the understanding that they would be returned to Syria when the country was stable enough to house them properly. Dr. Maria Santos from the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City spoke next. Charles actually helped us recover several artifacts that had been stolen from our collections decades ago. He would purchase them at auction and then return them to us free of charge. The man was a hero to the international museum community. Emma, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that had been weighing on David's mind. "So, what do we do about Victoria Kane and her threats?" Marcus Webb's voice was firm. "We fight. We document everything. We contact the appropriate authorities ourselves before they can twist the narrative. And most importantly, we continue Charles's work exactly as he intended." But the legal and moral support didn't solve their immediate problem. Victoria Kane returned the next day with additional vehicles and what appeared to be a small army of assistants and security personnel. "Mr. Matthews, have you considered our offer?" "We have," David said, Emma standing beside him on the hotel's front porch. "And the answer is no." Victoria's facade of politeness disappeared entirely. "Then you've made a very expensive mistake. By tomorrow morning, you'll be dealing with investigations from the FBI, Interpol, and UNESCO. Your collection will be seized as evidence, and you'll spend the next decade in legal battles that will bankrupt you." "Actually," said a new voice from behind David and Emma, "they'll be dealing with me." David turned to see a man in his 60s emerging from the hotel lobby. He was tall, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that somehow managed to look both expensive and practical. "Marcus Webb." The man introduced himself to Victoria Kane. "I represent the Glacier Peak Foundation and the Matthews family. And you, Miss Kane, are trespassing on private property." Victoria's confidence faltered for the first time. "This is a private business matter. No. This is an attempted extortion of a legitimate cultural institution." Marcus pulled out his own tablet and began reading from it. "The Marchetti Group, which you represent, has been under investigation by the art crime team of the FBI for the past 18 months. Your organization is suspected of using fraudulent claims to acquire valuable artifacts at below-market prices." Emma watched in fascination as Marcus systematically dismantled Victoria Kane's threats. He produced documentation proving the legitimate provenance of every piece she had questioned. He showed her copies of correspondence with government officials from various countries, thanking Uncle Charles for his cooperation in repatriating stolen artifacts. He even played recordings of phone calls where Victoria and her associates discussed fabricating legal challenges to force the sale of private collections. "You have no legal standing here," Marcus concluded. "And if you continue to harass my clients, we will pursue criminal charges for attempted extortion." Victoria Kane and her team left without another word, their SUVs disappearing down the mountain road like a retreating army. "How did you get here so fast?" David asked Marcus. "Charles called me 3 days before his death and told me to be ready. He predicted this would happen almost exactly as it did." Marcus smiled. "Your uncle was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else." But the real transformation began after the immediate threats were resolved. With Marcus Webb's help, David and Emma established the Glacier Peak Foundation as a legitimate cultural institution. The hotel above was renovated and reopened, quickly becoming one of the most exclusive destinations in Alaska for visitors interested in art, history, and culture. The underground collection was reorganized as a research center, with visiting scholars from around the world coming to study pieces they could never have accessed otherwise. Emma threw herself into learning everything she could about museum management, art history, and cultural preservation. David discovered a talent for hospitality management and building relationships with the international academic community. "Dad, look at this letter from Oxford," Emma said one evening, as they reviewed correspondence in Uncle Charles's underground office, which had become their command center. "They want to send a team of graduate students to study the medieval manuscripts collection, and the Smithsonian wants to discuss a long-term loan arrangement for some of the Native American artifacts." David looked up from his own stack of papers. Hotel reservations from guests who were coming specifically to consult with visiting scholars, funding requests from universities that wanted to support the Foundation's research activities, and invitations to academic conferences around the world. 6 months ago, we were about to be evicted from a crummy apartment in Ohio. Now we're running an international cultural institution. Emma grinned. And the crazy thing is, it feels right. Like this is what we were supposed to be doing all along. The transformation in their relationship was perhaps the most remarkable change of all. The desperate, struggling dynamic of a single father trying to provide for his daughter had evolved into a true partnership. Emma was no longer just David's child. She was his colleague, his co-guardian of Uncle Charles's legacy, his partner in building something meaningful. "Dad, I've been thinking about the future," Emma said one evening as they sat in the hotel's renovated library, surrounded by books that Uncle Charles had collected over decades. "I want to get my PhD in art history, specialize in provenance research. I want to become the kind of scholar who can verify the authenticity and legal status of cultural artifacts." David nodded. "And I've been thinking about expanding the hotel, adding a conference center where scholars can present their research. Maybe starting a journal for cultural preservation studies. We could create something that Uncle Charles never imagined," Emma said excitedly. "Not just a place to store beautiful things, but a place where people come to understand why preserving culture matters." A year after inheriting the Glacier Peak Lodge, David and Emma hosted their first international symposium on cultural preservation. Scholars from 30 countries gathered in the renovated hotel to present research, share discoveries, and debate best practices for protecting endangered cultural heritage. Dr. Sarah Chen gave the keynote address. Charles Matthews spent 30 years proving that private individuals can be responsible guardians of cultural treasures. David and Emma Matthews are proving that the next generation can build on that legacy to create something even more valuable. A community of scholars and institutions working together to preserve human heritage for future generations. Emma, now 16, and already corresponding with university professors around the world about her future academic career, presented her own research on the Syrian manuscripts Uncle Charles had rescued. Her paper, co-authored with a scholar from Damascus University, detailed how the manuscripts had filled crucial gaps in the historical record of medieval Islamic scholarship. Uncle Charles didn't just save these manuscripts from destruction, Emma told the assembled scholars. He saved knowledge that would have been lost forever. David watched his daughter present her research to some of the world's leading academics, and he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate phone call at 3 a.m. to this gathering of brilliant minds working together to preserve the best of human achievement. That evening, as the symposium guests mingled in the hotel lobby and explored the carefully curated display areas that showcased selected pieces from the underground collection, David found himself standing at the same windows where he and Emma had first looked out over their inherited valley. Emma joined him, now tall enough to rest her chin on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't been brave enough to explore the basement that first day?" David considered the question. "I think Uncle Charles knew we would be. I think he saw something in us that we didn't see in ourselves. And what do you think that was? The same thing your mother had. The understanding that some things are too important to belong to any one person. That our job isn't to own beautiful things, but to make sure they survive for people who haven't been born yet. Outside the windows, the Alaska wilderness stretched endlessly under a sky painted with northern lights that danced green and gold across the darkness. 3 levels below their feet, $290 million worth of cultural treasures waited in climate-controlled chambers, no longer hidden but carefully protected, no longer secret but wisely guarded. David and Emma Matthews had inherited more than they could have imagined. They had inherited purpose, community, and a future that stretched far beyond their own lives. They had become bridges between past and future, guardians of human achievement, protectors of wonder itself. And in the quiet moments between conferences and correspondence, between restoration work and research projects, they remembered Uncle Charles and the woman named Margaret, who had started it all with a simple belief that beautiful things deserved to be preserved and shared. The Glacier Peak Lodge was no longer just a hotel in the Alaska wilderness. It had become a beacon for scholars, a sanctuary for treasures, and proof that sometimes the most important inheritances aren't measured in money, but in mission. As father and daughter stood together in the lobby of their transformed lives, surrounded by the quiet hum of meaningful work and the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, they knew that Uncle Charles's greatest gift hadn't been the collection itself. His greatest gift had been showing them who they could become when they stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about legacy. Anyone can inherit wealth, but only the truly courageous can inherit purpose and prove themselves worthy of the trust. David and Emma Matthews had done exactly that, transforming not just their own lives, but creating something that would benefit generations of scholars, students, and lovers of human achievement yet to come. Because sometimes, the most valuable inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to do with it that defines who you really are. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of discovery and transformation are waiting for you. Click to continue the journey. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the greatest treasures are the ones that bring out the best in who we can become.